Llegamos a la parte final de este observatorio sobre movilidad sostenible, ciudades inteligentes que estamos organizando en El Español y en Invertia, y en el que hemos estado durante los últimos 5 días analizando diferentes cuestiones, diferentes puntos, diferentes aspectos que van a ser importantes de cara a la movilidad los próximos años. Y como cierre final ya hemos escuchado a numerosos ponentes que han ido haciendo ya las distintas reflexiones, pero como conclusión final nos queremos quedar también con la comisaria de Transportes de la Comisión Europea, Adina Vălean. Es un placer para mí saludarla. Saludos y muy buenas tardes y bienvenida. So, Mrs. Vălean, good afternoon and welcome to El Español and Invertia.
Good afternoon, saludos, buenas tardes.
Bajo el título de Movilidad inteligente, ciudades inteligentes, el futuro post-COVID, hemos estado durante estos días, como venía escuchando y como han podido analizar y comprobar todos nuestros lectores, nuestros espectadores, hemos analizado la cuestión desde distintos puntos. Sí que me gustaría abordar con usted algunos de los mensajes clave que han salido durante estas jornadas, y encima de la mesa, evidentemente, no podemos olvidarlo, no podemos obviarlo, está ese plan de recuperación, ese recovery plan de la Unión Europea de 750.000 millones de euros. En las próximas semanas se van a tener que presentar los distintos proyectos por parte de los países, por parte de los distintos gobiernos, y aquí el ministro Ábalos y buena parte del gobierno nos ha ido explicando ya, bueno, pues cuáles son un poco las guías principales por las que se va a regir el gobierno español a la hora de seleccionar los proyectos que va a presentar a la Comisión Europea. A mí me gustaría saber qué tipo de proyectos son los que van a primar en el ámbito del transporte por parte de las autoridades europeas a la hora de conceder las distintas ayudas.
Transport sector, you know very well, it was so hard hit by the crisis, and it was hard hit economically, but also for the jobs of the people, and we need to maintain and use all we have in order to help the sector to recover from this crisis. One of the most important instruments, apart from our budget for 7 years, which has several opportunities for financing the transport, is this Next Generation EU, with its recovery and resilience facility. The way it works is that each member state, so Spain in our case, according to the recommendations from the European semester report, will have to draw up a plan of reform and support for the economy. And I do believe that since transport was so hit, transport will be an important part of these plans the member states will present. Now for Spain, I know that investment in the rail infrastructure and efforts to move freight from road to rail would be 2 important recommendations. But this, it's easy to be done, or it is important, and we know what we need to do on this. Of course, it means investment in the changing of gauge. It means investment in logistics, in terminals, new state-of-the-art terminals of moving freight from road to rail, or terminals in ports. And why not, very important, the deployment of the electronic signaling system, ERTMS, along the rail infrastructure. So this is something which would be very important for Spain in transport sector. And I think we have to take into consideration that rail, Spain is having a huge rail infrastructure and network, so the investments are heavy. By the other hand, you have also success stories. If we look, for example, at the high-speed connection between Madrid and Barcelona, which was able, and I'm using this as an example for other countries because it was able, with its completion, to replace short-haul flights. So yes, a lot of opportunities, and I'm sure Spain will benefit from this money for transport purposes also.
Evidentemente el ferrocarril va a ser una de las claves, va a ser esencial en esos planes, y hemos discutido largo y tendido de cómo debe ser. A las puertas tenemos también la liberalización del sector ferroviario. Señora Adina, es verdad que hemos visto señora Vălean, hemos visto unos pequeños retrasos culpa del COVID en esa liberalización. ¿Espera usted que llegue por fin la liberalización ferroviaria plena a España durante el próximo año?
Well, to build on what you are saying, rail is important, but rail is important because what we want to do with this European money, unprecedented funds for the recovery, is to follow on the two basic principles. One is the sustainability development in transport and in other economic areas, and the other one is digitalization. Now, for the rail in particular and liberalization, what I would like to see is the fourth rail package being implemented with its market pillar, also with its technical pillar. That's why I mentioned for the technical pillar the ERTMS. But I think liberalization is needed because citizens would need to have, and also it's valid for passengers and for freight. Passengers would love to see a modernization in how they transport themselves, and then intermodality. Because, for example, if you want to go to point A to B now in 800 kilometers, let's say, if you don't have, you will have to change several modes of transport. You don't have through tickets. Of course, to have through tickets, you need to have data sharing between operators, which would allow services to emerge and people to benefit in terms of efficiency in their transportation. It's the same for the freight. So the more we share and we more create a liberalized space for data sharing, the services and the development in the market will follow. So I would say, yes, it is needed, and I really hope that Spain will complete that also.
Una de las claves que se han fijado también por parte de la Comisión Europea y del Gobierno español es conseguir que el transporte, no solamente el ferroviario, también el transporte de mercancías, el transporte urbano, sea más eficiente, más sostenible, tenga cada vez una mayor capacidad de resiliencia, pero ¿con qué fuentes de energía nos vamos a mover en el futuro? ¿El eléctrico va a ser la clave?
What we are going to use in terms of fuels for the transport is part of the discussion on how to cut emissions overall in transport sector. But it's just part of the discussion because it will be a basket of measures. We will have alternative fuels, but we will have cleaner vehicles. We will have an improved management of the transport operation in order to have more efficiency. We will have automation, modernization in all the systems. All these together will create a sustainable transport. And let me remind you that by 2050 we have the target of becoming a neutral climate neutral continent, which would mean for transport to cut 90% of its emissions. And we have an intermediate target for 2030 of reducing emissions by 55%. Now, this being said, the Commission will propose alternative fuels directive for next year. We are counting on alternative fuels for aviation, also for maritime, very important, two sectors in which there is a huge need to cut emissions. Also for road transportation, we have to look, if we are talking about public transportation in cities, fleets of vans, of delivery, in cities, for urban mobility, I think all alternatives which are cleaner are to be encouraged. Also electrical would be the best solution. But if we look, for example, at road transportation with heavy-duty vehicles or long haulers, I think there we can also bet on other things. For the future, we are looking at hydrogen, and that's why we established at European level also the Hydrogen Alliance, Clean Hydrogen Alliance, but also for the time being LNG, because it means a cutting of emissions for the long haulers in road transportation. It's not enough to ask for alternative fuels if we do not or for zero and low emission vehicles, if we do not put in place the infrastructure for recharging and refueling. That's why we commit as European Commission to help deployment of 1 million recharging and refueling stations all over Europe by 2025. Of course, we will need more, and we are laying with our strategy for smart and sustainable mobility the grounds for the deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure in Europe.
El problema que tenemos, señora Vălean, es que, claro, de cara a la evolución del vehículo eléctrico va a ser fundamental esos puntos de recarga de los que usted nos hablaba, pero también el poner en marcha las fábricas de baterías. Hasta ahora van a ser punto esencial, de hecho, para los vehículos, el de las baterías. Hasta ahora hay otros países que nos llevan la delantera. Yo no sé, Europa, qué está haciendo en este sentido para subirse al tren y no perder el tren de las baterías eléctricas de los coches.
Well, first let me tell you that we have seen in those countries in which the share in the market of new vehicles it's higher for electric vehicles. We have seen that the sale of these electrical vehicles also created a private investment movement in recharging stations. That's why we are saying we are going to help build an important number, and by the way, with the Connecting Europe facility blending call, we have recently financed around 250 recharging stations in Italy, for example, because they were interested in that. In Spain and in France, we have financed around 450 electric buses, I think, for depot in Paris and Barcelona. So we are doing things. We are waiting also for the market to move in this respect. And for your question on batteries, we have established this European Alliance for Batteries, especially to bring all stakeholders on the value chain in production of batteries inside Europe and try to give it a new impulse. So we hear you, and we are trying through research and innovation and establishing this pan-European mechanism like the Alliance for Batteries to improve the production, and because this is, of course, part of the story, success story of an electric car. We need to have performant batteries, and then for charging we have to have high-speed charging points, not a regular one, because people don't need to spend I don't know how much time to wait a car to be recharged. So yes, we are working on all of this, and it's part of our strategy.
Lo que está claro es que vamos a necesitar multitud de infraestructuras, desarrollar multitud de puntos de recarga, vamos a necesitar desarrollar, ¿por qué no?, también quizá nuevas autovías, o por lo menos renovar las que tenemos, también las de transporte. En el caso de las vías de gran capacidad, ¿nos tenemos que ir acostumbrando al pago por uso en ese tipo de vías?
Yes, this is also part of the story, because I forgot to mention earlier, but apart from the vehicle itself, which needs to be more performant in relation with the battery, the recharging points of high capacity is then the way people will use that, and we do believe that more electronic, prepaid, all forms of payment which are alternative, easy to use, will be also part of the story, and this has to be taken into account. There where the authorities, the companies will deploy this infrastructure for the recharging points. The way we use the payment, it's also part of the story.
Nos quedamos prácticamente sin tiempo ya, señora Vălean. Creo además que tiene otros compromisos en los próximos minutos. Simplemente una pregunta más, y es si la Unión Europea, la Comisión Europea, tiene en mente seguir con sus planes de gravar medioambientalmente a las aerolíneas en unos momentos en los que lo están pasando francamente mal después de la pandemia del COVID-19.
So for the airlines, we have stepped very quickly, because maybe the aviation sector was the hardest hit among all transport modes, and we have seen that. But we stepped in very quickly with flexible state aid rules so that member states could step in and help the companies. From regulatory point of view, we have looked at the slot waiver. So I think we brought in a set of measures to help in these times of crisis. But the emerging from the crisis and the use of potential next money from European instruments has to be done in a more sustainable way. So that's why through the strategy I'm going to propose in a couple of days, at the beginning of December, we will present a basket of measures for aviation to decarbonize its operation. emissions. It is something which needs to be a contribution from the air sector. But this is a basket of measures because, as I said, alternative fuels, but also a better operation, and this is part of our single European sky. Then, of course, cleaner aircrafts, and we have heard promises made by the industry also in delivering new types of aircrafts depending on alternative fuels. So a basket of measures with support and incentives, but a contribution which will make the system more sustainable. Because we have seen previous the crisis, it was a complete congestion of aviation operations, and now in the crisis nearly stand still. What we have seen is the problems emerging from the fact that there was not enough flexibility in the system in order to scale up and scale down. So what we would like to see with the help of all the financial instruments existing in Europe for the recovery, that this resilience of the system is also built in order to have more flexibility and to be more clean and sustainable.
Adina Vălean, comisaria de Transportes de la Comisión Europea, gracias por estar con nosotros en este Observatorio de la Movilidad. Ha sido un auténtico placer. Señora Vălean, thank you very much to be in this meeting. Thanks, and I hope to see you in the next time.
Thank you very much. That's a promise. Thank you for having me.